what I most commonly see is over romanticized idea of entrepreneurship. People think what they see on social media, and they think like, oh, this is going to be like me wheeling and dealing, and when we launched Glambox, I remember I found like the first weekend of official launch, these are all MBA, top schools. We're all packing boxes. They're all packing boxes, unloading truck worth of boxes, hand packing the boxes that were of the first batch of Glambox that went out. Nothing glamorous about it. And you have to find the joy in that.
Yeah.
And I think people have this romanticized idea, and the reality is that you will have at least multiple times where you don't know where payroll is going to come from. You will have moments where clients are unhappy, and there'll be many, many moments where the crash of the company is imminent. You have to be uncomfortable with that level of uncertainty.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the AUD podcast channel. We have a very special guest with us, Mr. Faris Akkad. Faris, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. So Faris, for the people who don't know, Faris is the regional director for Meta, and I know everyone watching that, eyes just went up a little bit. I'm sure they have a lot of questions and are really interested to hear from you. I know your background is in media, working at places like NBC, and you were living in the States for a while before moving back to the region to take on this role at Meta. And from the research I've done, it seems that it was the right decision for you. The way you've spoken about it seems to be that you wanted to be in a place that you could make an impact. And I think over the last couple of years, you really have been making that impact. But before we get into everything, Faris, today, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. Yeah, like you mentioned, Faris Akkad. I am originally from the region. I'm originally Syrian. Born in Brazil, though, and moved around quite a bit.
Oh, wow.
My dad was a diplomat, so I was born in Brazil and moved around quite a bit. I lived in Europe. I lived in London for a couple of years. I lived in Spain for 6 years. I actually finished high school in Spain. I did live in Syria and grew up, I would say, in an Arabic household. And then I went to the US. I did my undergrad, master's, MBA, worked for a few years. So I was for about a dozen years in the US. And then the opportunity presented itself to relocate or experience the region. I didn't have a clear vision that I wanted to come back, but it was always lingering thought in my head. And I was in management consulting, and I had worked for several firms, and the opportunity came at the time with Booz & Co., which is now Strategy N, and to relocate. And it was like a 2-year kind of adventure. 2 became 4, and then you start getting entrenched in the region, and yeah, the rest is history. I was always in the tech, media, and telecom space. Mm-hmm. And I have family in the cinema business and the Hollywood business, and then also as these two worlds converged, I found myself that tech and media, are almost overlapping, and found the privilege to be at that intersection, having dabbled in both worlds, and so this is how my transition to tech, and yeah, absolutely no regrets.
No, it sounds like you don't have any. So on the point you just mentioned, I know your family is in media, and I know if I'm not mistaken, your uncle was a director. So do you think that passion that you have for that intersection of media and tech comes from the upbringing you had around your family who are all involved in that world?
Yeah, I think, look, the passion I have is about the relevance of this topic. We're discussing off air, anecdotally, like in social settings, what people talk about, etc. Media and tech, and this conversion, is one of the few industries that everybody uses. Everybody, without exception, uses to some degree. And people tell me, I'm not on social media. I'm like, do you use WhatsApp? Do you use this? And even if you're not, you probably are, but you're not active on it.
True.
But and back in the day, the content creation, cinema, even TV, the distribution channel of TV has lost relevance, but content creation is still very, very relevant. And I think that being in the eye of every storm, of you being the conversation as part of the social fabric at the most micro and macro level, fascinated me. There's no other industry that can claim that. And that is very interesting to me because it's part of people's life. It influences people more than anything else, and it guides the conversation. So media does this. I think now tech does this, and this convergence has made it even more prevalent. So what before used to be in the Middle East, people consume 4 to 6 hours a day of television. Now they are on those platforms, consistently. It's anywhere, anytime, in short format, finding niche audiences. So that evolution, being at the cutting edge of human interaction, is fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a good point there that I didn't even consider. It is media and tech have become so prevalent, like you said, in all our lives, and it probably is the one intersection that everyone has some sort of relationship to. All of us use, like you said, if we're not active on the platforms, we still have them to communicate, the WhatsApps, the Instagram. Like, for example, my father has Instagram, but he doesn't post anything, but he's up to date on everything. He's on TikTok too. And it reminded, and when my parents started getting on that, it reminded me of what you talked about, how you saw where that things were shifting, and the example you gave with when your mom started using Shahid, if that's not the alarm bell that like things are moving, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, I mean, look, congrats to your dad for being hip. I don't know how, but it's absolutely, it's keeping up with the times. Today, according to the Economist, 88% of youth in the Arab world use social media as a primary source of news. These trends are serious. They're not just the casual entertainment stuff. It's infotainment, it's edutainment, it's a means to shape a culture. And so, I think regardless of your age, it's relevant to you to stay relevant.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of, when people say, I'm not on social media, I don't, because it's become so second nature. When I remind people that you are on WhatsApp, right? It's not social media, but it's a communication tool. And I think anybody who's now in any sort of communication will have to have some sort of messaging. Messaging becomes so relevant. I'm using it just as an example, that all of a sudden it becomes a preferential way of communicating. It becomes anecdotally. The culture shifts in a subtle but quick way in technology. So what used to be, you can message me or you can call me, all of a sudden becomes a preference for you to message.
Yeah.
And then when you have a preference to message as an inbound, you also start thinking about, well, why can't I just file the task through messaging? And businesses that are savvy and consumer focused shift very quickly in that. And before you know it, you have companies like BN Sports that does 80% of their customer service through WhatsApp.
Yeah.
You have airlines that are notifying you about your flight through WhatsApp because they realize, like, how many SMSs do you receive? Do you read them? Even more on email. It's not personal and it's not really interactive, whereas WhatsApp makes it seem like you're multitasking, makes it seem like just a frictionless interaction through your day. That feeling that, I didn't even talk to the airline. Well, you just messaged the airline, you actually just booked a ticket, right? That's great. And when people feel that it's so seamless that they don't even recall it, it's part of their daily habit.
Yeah. I wanted to come back for a second and touch on, as we've been talking, how things have been shifting in media and in news and through all these platforms. I want to hear from you, how was that transition going from working at NBC to Meta? Because I know with NBC, it would probably be, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, more media than tech focused, but then moving to Meta is more, I'd say more tech than media focused. So how was that transition for you? And I guess what surprised you the most after you made that transition?
Yeah. I get asked this question a lot, and I think a lot of people think when they say media or TV, they think, I'm an actor, I'm a director, I'm a cameraman, which is a huge part of the industry,
Sure.
and I think it's the foundation of the industry. But there's a lot more to it, right? It's a business. I was always, I would say, more on the business and technology side of the business. So I could see these trends quite quickly. So our initial role was, head of basically digital business development for Mithi, and then shifted more, I assumed also the role of head of distribution, which included not just digital distribution, but also what we call linear or satellite distribution. It's basically, my responsibility was to make sure that we're getting our channels where they need to be, and that they are also, we're getting the right value for those channels. Because the shift of this convergence between media and tech started happening on the distribution side. Like I said, making a show is still making a show, whether you're making it for Netflix or you're making it for a TV channel. But when you think about how it's going to be reaching the consumer, initially it becomes just a commercial and technical discussion. Mm. But then when the user habits come into play, satellite meant I tell you an hour, you sit, after, like in the region, Nashrat al-Akhbar, and you watch your TV show. But if you have the flexibility to watch it anywhere, anytime, then okay, there's a commercial and distribution implication, but down the line there's a creative implication. Because now I think, well, I don't need to make it the same length. Why
Sure.
does every episode have to be 45 minutes? It could be 30 minutes if the story is done, or an hour and a half, and the consumer can stop it and watch it whenever they want. I have to take into consideration that some of these consumers are watching it on a plane, or watching it in the car, or watching it alone now, not with their family. And so the industry changes that way. Now, being on the front where that triggered that change, I could clearly see the signs of people watching less TV, the traditional linear way, switching to a more VOD format, and demanding to be interactive with both the cast, the crew, and the channel that is broadcasting that. This shift, immediately you can see the ramification, and these ramifications are ongoing now. I think you see the rise of short video, you see the rise of user-generated content, you see the rise of creator content and niche content. At the end of the day, we have 24 hours a day. And I always like to say we trade in attention.
Absolutely, yeah.
So at the end of the day, if you're watching 2 hours of short videos a day, social media of sorts, combine them all, and you still have your normal lifestyle, that disposable time that is being used there is being taken from somewhere else.
Very true.
So the implications on industries have to be thought of in terms of what category they sit in the consumer mind. So if this is leisure, then what else is it impacting? Does that mean surely less hours of TV, maybe less even hours of Netflix? But then it also could mean less hours of other things. And this applies to whether you're talking about gaming, whether you're talking about, but I think initially people see the immediate effect. The opportunity is in the ramification of these effects.
Yeah. And I think the point you made about how everything has become a lot more on demand compared to before, I think people now, because there's so many options and it's so available, the consumer's choice has become even, I think, more important than it was before. And the point you mentioned earlier, I think the crucial part, if this wasn't seamless, it wouldn't have reached the level that it's reached to. But with the advance of tech, that's what's, I think, and now with AI coming into it, we're just, I think, turning up like the flame on, we're going to be even pickier. We want it to be even faster. And I think, do you think with AI, humans will ever be satisfied?
Well, I think AI is meant to address and make more efficient some of these problems. I'll tell you, you mentioned that humans have more choice, right? And it's true. Even on the VOD front, I can name you off the bat like 5 players in the region alone, right? So the problem that arises from that is choice. Humans don't do well with choice. They like curation, right? Yes. And so the opportunity today, if you ask me around VOD, is it to launch a new VOD? I'd say if you have a curation solution, curation meaning selecting the content that's most relevant to you from across platforms, you're onto something. Because there's plenty of content production that happens in the region that continues from the TV days. It's shifting to digital. There were people who saw the opportunity to go into that VOD play and develop it, NBC being the leading with their Shahid. But then now there's a plethora of content. This is not even alluding to the social media and like the smaller content. So if you're able to create that curation and that customized feed, then you're onto something. The most effective way to do that is through AI. And so AI is coming at a time where we have big data problems that require, big data type of engineering to provide relevant solutions. And that will have implications on hardware, that will have implications on education, job market, etc. But it's a natural evolution, and it's inevitable for the state in which we are in terms of economy and size of information that we're trying to handle.
Yeah. And like you said, just to read one of your quotes when it comes to AI, you mentioned that people who know AI will replace people who don't know AI before AI replaces people. So, and if there's a right or wrong, if something's binary, then that's where AI is going to come in very handy, stuff that's very operational, very binary, just to improve our daily processes. So I want to ask you now, moving forward down this AI track that we're all going down, do you think, because my father tells me this all the time, he's like, you should learn about the underlying tech behind AI. My argument to him is, I'm like, that might be useful. I don't know how interested I am in that something so technical, but my perspective has always been it will come down to who can utilize the tools relevant to what they need to do the best. So from your perspective, what do you say? Do you think there still is a significant benefit that maybe we don't recognize down the line right now, of understanding the underlying tech, or if we can just identify the platforms relevant to what we need to make us more efficient, that's what it's going to come down to?
Look, knowledge is power, and the more you can understand, I think, the better. It's a question of efficiency of allocation of resources or your time, right? Understand. I mean, and to what level of granularity you want to go in understanding the functionalities? It's a complex, very scientific type of approach, and for us, for instance, as Meta, our investment in AI, even the approach to have an open source AI, okay.
Kind of like what Tesla does with
Llama 3 is now the most downloaded open source AI, was also in part driven by the fact that to attract the best talent, who tend to be academic scientists. I mean, this is the level of sophistication. They ethically and professionally wanted to be able to publish and have an open AI format. So almost dictated like, okay, if you want to do the best product possible, you have to kind of work around universities and academic institutions that require this openness in the approach. So I give you this anecdote to kind of anchor where that level of technicality is. Now, the more you understand it, the better you are to interact with it. But if you ask me like about building AI technologies, it's very costly. It demands the academic depth. It demands a lot of requirements. So I think that infrastructure is going to be built by big players. Because it's just, you could, Google Maps, you build on Google Maps. A bunch of stuff was built on Google Maps. But I could have told you this as a platform, this is going to be a foundation to a lot of things. Maybe I can't pinpoint it would have been Uber, but I can tell you there's a lot of utility to having the world mapped and last mile kind of ability to reach. I think the same thing with AI. I think once you build this infrastructure, there's a lot of implications, especially if you have open source where people are able to develop on it freely and you harness the creativity of the ecosystem. But if you're trying to kind of from a career perspective or a business perspective, focus your energy, I would say AI is going to be pervasive across all sectors, all economies. Building the infrastructure or understanding the underlying technology is one sector, one economy, which is the tech sector, and developing that. That's where we are absolutely focusing. I think all of the big players are focusing. We've been focusing on this for years to even have the privileged position we have today. But if you're in a certain industry and I'm going to pivot, and I think that's a big reach. But there's going to be massive opportunities in your own industry, in your own sector, to build on that and automate and make more efficient and create new experiences. And that's where I would put my energy, because combining your sector knowledge with the potential implications of AI is where the winning formula will lie.
And I think a very crucial point you said there that I didn't really consider, I think the open source factor of it. This is something quite, I think, different to how tech companies have probably run in the past. It was all built historically. You guys are the best at what you do because of your unique IP that you guys have developed. That's yours, that's proprietary, and that's what makes you guys stand out from the crowd. But with AI coming now, it seems that those barriers are kind of coming down a bit, and everyone's kind of, because no one really knows what the future of that holds. So it's kind of like, all right, guys, let's open this up to everyone so that we can get the best maybe possibilities that we could get from this type of, from AI and that kind of work.
It's a way to obviously accelerate its growth, its youth. It's the way to address nuanced needs that might not be a priority for a closed environment, meaning, let's say you have a specific need to AI, or a region has a specific need to AI, as an app, as a functionality, that no one is planning to build in the near future because it doesn't rise up to that priority. But with an open source, you're able to develop that and address your need without having to wait to where you fit on the spectrum. And most importantly, there is a diversity and inclusion element to OpenAI.
Diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion,
which is something we also take very seriously when we develop our apps. And that is, I think diversity and inclusion, people think, do I have the right quota of certain people or
typically,
certain categories?
Yeah,
yes,
right. Yeah.
Yes. And there is an element of social good for that, and it's very important. But what is even more important is to include those points of view and those experiences into developing the technology that you're putting out to the world. So by having diversity, you ensure that those people are bringing their roots, their culture, their points of view into the development of the tool. And the same thing happens with AI. You can be as inclusive as you want, but the world is a diverse and complex place.
Sure.
And as a platform that has close to 4 billion active monthly users, we know firsthand what it means to be part of the social fabric of every place in the world at the most micro level, and the diversity that presents. And so for us, as a company, we take D&I, diversity and inclusion, very seriously because of the robustness that it also brings to the products.
Sure, of course.
And so, and this robustness is not about reading a book or, there's a famous quote by Denzel Washington. I saw it in an interview where they're asking him about one movie where it was very African-American story. And he said, this was an African-American director. Could it have been another director?
About the comb, right?
Yeah, technically it could have been a director, but then it's not the knowledge about, it's the culture, it's the subtle things, right? And this is what I think if you are from the region, I don't know, and you wake up listening to Feiruz, or you remember the insane things that your grandma used to do, or these nuances are what make a difference between just like a pure science. And another quote that I like that I think captures this well is, knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are a fruit. Well, technically, they're a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put them in a fruit salad. and I think that only gets captured through D&I.
I think the points you made about how the nuanced aspects of it, that including different types of cultures into these kind of things, also for AI to advance the way it is, because like I think a very important point you mentioned, everyone has their own priorities. So, but if you give me access to that tool or to that platform or that software, allows me to develop the tools I need for my priority, and that could also down the line or one day become very useful to you as well. It kind of makes the, as you said, the product richer, the product more fuller, and it advances the speed with which these tools are developed and AI will develop overall. Now, of course, everyone talks globally about, be careful, guys, you know, like we need to have the things in place, you know, to get this going. Even I remember you mentioned in a podcast that, I don't know if it was your chief AI officer who came, visited the region, he's like, AI now is at the capability of just a cat. But from my perspective, I'm like, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty useful cat, you know, so far. So I can't even imagine where it's going. And I know that I just saw Meta Connect, actually, and you guys just released the Orion holographic AR glasses. And you mentioned that in that podcast that in the future, there's going to be a blend of physical and digital is supposed to be seamless. Now, as we continuously shift into this brand new world of everything becoming, you know, digital and physical as well, what do you think the challenges are going to be for us to adopt this kind of technology? Because I liken it kind of to how the internet was at the time. There were some people who really understood it, really saw the potential, and then down the line, everyone got on board. Do you think the adoption would be faster now compared to how it was then? Or do you think as people, our resistance to change has not changed over the last 20, 30 years?
So look, there's many aspects for adoption, and one of them is resistance to change, but also a huge part of it is interconnectivity in the world and the rate of information flow. And I think those have significantly increased. So if you look at, you know, the amount of time to reach 1 billion users that it took radio versus TV versus, you know, and you've seen these charts, that has been shrinking dramatically. And I think that will continue to shrink because the world is quite interconnected, which means that usually if you have a product market fit, it grows very quickly. If you don't have a product market fit, it fizzles very quickly, and then we move on. And so I think the adoption is likely to continue. Now, there are concerns. There were concerns with every technology. And, you know, I've seen some of these yellow papers with kind of fear articles about radio and the same thing with TV. And I think there's always going to be some concerns, some of them valid. I think it's some healthy paranoia to make sure that we have the right kind of framework to manage this. But overall, if it's aiding with the evolution of humanity, by all means. I mean, the ethos of the glasses and the Quest is to create a sense of presence where presence is not feasible. And I think a great example is COVID. You know, we had COVID, we were locked down, many people couldn't see family members, you could only communicate. And, you know, the ramification of this, whether it's immigration reasons, financial reasons, health reasons, if you're able to take that phone call, which nobody would say a phone call is, being able to call your grandma across the world is a negative thing. What if you could create a sense of presence with your grandma for that same communication? This is not about living in a digital box or if you can go see your grandma, for sure, 100%. But if you're not able to, or if you're not able every week and you can see your grandma twice a week or daily with a sense of presence, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
That is something that I think is a huge leap for humanity. You know, we as humans are social creatures. A huge pillar for longevity, which agreed by many studies, is a sense of community, is a sense of presence with others. And this gets us a step closer to that, which is incredible. I mean, some of the demos that were shown in Connect is 2 people in 2 different parts of the world playing ping pong on the same hologram.
Yeah, that was crazy to watch.
And you know, that sense of interaction is unique, and it is maybe unsettling for some and scary, but the ethos of it is a ramification of what we do as humans anyway.
Yeah.
So I think it's about not replacing the physical, it's about making the real world just a bit richer.
Yeah. You know, I think that's the first time someone has explained it to me in that way that I start to think, because I think a lot of times we think of technology as pulling us away from human experiences, But listening to the way you just described it, and for example, replicating that presence of your grandma, for example, being in front of you, you're giving me, through this technology, more opportunities to have that human experience that I crave. And I've never thought of it that way until you just explained it like that.
Yeah, it's. I think when you try it, and this is why people usually have a lot of things to say theoretically,
Yeah.
and then they try it, and if they sincerely try it and give it a chance, I think what they leave with is, after being impressed by the bells and whistles, is the potential of, I actually felt this person was there, and what does that mean? And for different people, it means different things, and then opportunities spar up. What does that mean in terms of friendship, connectivity, business connections, dating, anything that requires human interaction? What does that element mean to it?
Yeah.
Today, we go back to messaging, which, by the way, I talk about messaging because it's a big priority for us in the region. The region globally, ranks very high in terms of usage. But today, you meet someone in you exchange information. It's quite customary. It's almost now protocol or etiquette that I don't just call you.
Yeah, that would be strange.
That would be strange, right?
Yeah,
Especially,
yeah.
I think the younger you go in the generation, it goes from strange to weird. Like I've heard, my nephew said that would be creepy. Right? Like you give me your number and I call you, it's creepy.
Yeah.
But if I send you a WhatsApp,
Sure.
yeah, not intrusive, right? And some communication goes completely on WhatsApp.
True.
And so how did we get we went from, I don't know, letters to phone video, and now no, let me go back to a more efficient letter, but I like the ability to be able to think, not to be put on the spot, answer you on my go. Some people express themselves better in writing. I think that transition of what is socially acceptable and becomes the norm is what's going to happen in this virtual, we'll find a place, but definitely technology is going to be part of that place.
Absolutely, yeah. It's us shifting into that new normal that we're not comfortable with just yet, or it hasn't reached the level that it's been globally adopted. You've spoken in the past about how this region in particular, when it comes to, we're not necessarily ahead of the game when it comes to technological innovation, but we're one of the fastest adopters in the world. Now, the question I have for you is, what's so unique about this part of the world that makes us adopt the technology so fast? And do you think that now with the UAE in particular in the region really investing into AI in the future, are we starting to see a shift in that narrative?
Yeah, so I think I always say the future is east, right? And if you're looking from a European perspective, for some basic reasons, which is demographics. We are 70% under 30. We're a young, quite dynamic region, versus the West that's facing more of an aging population, declining population, and most of these technologies are adopted and more used by the youth. So the foundation of the user base sits here. The growth of the population also sits here. And I think there is a bit of political dynamics that are happening, which makes the region a lot more kind of ambitious, aspirational, and focused more on optimism than focusing on the negative and pessimism. And that creates a much more dynamic environment. It allows us to adopt technologies faster, etc. There's also the fact that the region has gone through hardships and we've had to be creative. People with the unfortunate situation that's happening now, our platforms become a key way to broadcast issues, to communicate with family, to check in, to do fundraising, to basically galvanize a community.
Yeah.
So I've seen all sorts of things, and the beauty of it being open for anyone to be able to use and build happens there. And so creativity and innovation also starts happening here, because the way we deal with a crisis here is not going to be that different than when a crisis happens in Latin America, right? So there's a lot of these interactions that take place. But most importantly, I think because these are big investments and you know, these are a lot of times government, semi-government type of agreements, I think the vision of wanting to be an information-based society and creating jobs and opportunities and the lack of politicization of the decisions that takes place in the region, in the Gulf in particular, I think has been very encouraging. I mean, you know, His Highness the President of the UAE is in the US now, and you know, the deal with NVIDIA, and he met with the CEO of Microsoft, are all indication of how forward-leaning the UAE in general is. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in Saudi. Qatar is leaning in. So I think this dynamism is bringing the center of the world closer to the Middle East. Like, it's truly now the political center, economic center, and from the migration patterns you see, all of this is creating this. Now, again, are we, we don't have these academic institutions here. So the approach of many countries here is to attract the people with the talent.
Right?
There
you go, yeah.
Be the best hotel room in the world. To have the kind of money and foresight and emotional and political endurance to ride it out for years and make sure that we are anchored here. That's quite unique to the region.
Yeah.
That's quite unique to the region, and I think it's gotten a lot more polarized in the West, which is creating more of an opportunity for the region to step up. And we're all hopeful that we will play a big part in this.
No, absolutely. And I think the point you made about we don't have necessarily the academic institutions in these fields or the respective fields or what's coming. So the other tactic that the region has decided to go with, all right, let's bring the best over to build that infrastructure so we can start to play on that level with, the rest of the world. And like you said, it does feel like things are moving more east, because I can speak, for myself growing up here. I grew up here pretty much my entire life. Growing up, you travel around the world, be like, oh, where'd you live? I live in Dubai. I'm like, oh, what's that? Then at the time, you'd be like, Burj Arab. They'd be like, oh, the 7-star hotel. Of course, everyone knew that. But now, no matter, you could be in the most remote place ever. Yes. Everyone knows where Dubai is. Everyone knows about Saudi. So your point about how things have been shifting is 100% true. And coming back to what you talked about earlier about the adoption and the rate of adoption, because it's 78% of the population is under 30 or so on. So it is quite youthful. My sister, for example, she's 20. I'm, about to be 34. So even just in that, I see the difference in tech adoption. The things she can do with her phone, I look at like, it's like a magician's using it so seamlessly. But I know you guys, just the other day, you released the teen accounts for Instagram. And I thought that was, honestly, that was a really great idea, because, and I remember in one of the interviews you talked about how your son, who I think is 7 or maybe 8 now, he's already started creating like content. I know he doesn't have the platforms and stuff, but from such a young age, he's already in that world that we're all, living in for so young. And the things, things that people can do for the people who don't know, setting time limits, so parents can monitor what's going on. So you're providing an ecosystem for the next generation to become ready for this new world in a safe manner. And this kind of brings us on to when it comes to AI or what you guys are developing at Meta. I think one of the challenges is things are moving so fast that things move so fast. We need time to collect all this data to make these great, decisions. So, but moving forward, things are only going to get faster. So how can do we need to kind of take a step back, and whatever platforms or whatever next tool you guys might be looking to build or the industries are looking to build, do we need to start thinking of those type of elements of safety and protection from the foundation? Because down the line, we might get to a point that something very bad might happen before we wake up to like, that's something we should have done.
Look, we do.
Yeah.
And to be clear, we think those things through from inception, through execution, to launch and post-launch. The challenge sometimes is that as you're building these things, it's impossible to be able to predict all the ramifications that will play out of this,
sure,
right?
Sure.
Because historically, let's take the teen. The ability of strangers to approach your teen in a few decades ago was like either physically or they would call them on the phone. So in a more connected world, there's a new challenge which requires new solutions, right? And these two solutions have to also balance the privacy of the teens, you know, so we have two categories, under 16, over 16, their willingness and freedom to be able to use the platform and feel that they have a bit of independence. So all of these kind of have to be balanced. A lot of the evolution of these safeguards also comes from feedback from the community. So
sure.
As upon launch, a very common practice is, a must practice is we have these consultations with stakeholders, governments, creators, businesses. We ask, you know, think tanks, NGOs, like how, you know, where do you see this going? What implications do you see? And we try to build it in. And as this goes live, then new outliers start happening, and then we adjust accordingly. We take pride that, you know, we've been around for a while, so we are probably a little bit more evolved on this front,
sure.
because, you know, we've faced more topics and we've faced more incidences that we've had to adjust to them. But it's monumental, and I can tell you from firsthand, you know, as a parent and, you know, the engineers and everybody that works on this, this is something that is top of mind for all of us. I talk about my son is still 7, turning 8 soon, but these people that he imitates are his new idols. Like, you know, the way we grew up with movie stars, and his primary source of, and we manage it, you know, he has daily limits and whatever, but he's not on social media, but he does watch some YouTube kids. He does watch,
sure.
And these guys are his idols. They are his superstars. So he is trying to emulate what he sees, the way Rambo or whatever, you know, whatever he was, your era. But it's understandable, and it's, you know, when parents say, can I prevent them from having any technology? I'm not sure complete prevention is wise, because it's the new norm. They will be isolated if you know, you just gotta manage it, and you know, we're working on providing as much as we can the tools for the parents to be able to have 80% of the flavor and not too much of the calories.
I love that example. I think it really, you know, brings to light the point you mentioned about preventing. Although you might think that is a good thing, the world now is you have to know how to use these things in order to be not even successful, just to be on the same level as everyone else. So to prevent you is going to be a disservice, but like you correctly said, it's all about management. And that's all we can do.
I don't like to discourage that curiosity. I mean, talk about this, to give my daughter a shout out too.
Shout out?
Yeah. She just turned 6, and she walks up to the TV and goes like this, and like, that TV doesn't do that.
No way, that's so
And
cute.
she goes, why not?
It's a fair question.
That's a more fair question than the TV doesn't do that. Like, why doesn't it do that? And I'm like, good question. Like, what? I'm used to this. I'm okay with it. But I think her generation won't be.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
It's not about saying, look, teaching her that not everything does that. It's about, you know, maybe asking the question, why not?
That's true, yeah. That's such a great example. That's so funny that she tries to decide.
Yeah.
Because everything else she probably interacts with does do that.
Everything.
So her logic is like, yeah, but this should, and therefore this should too. No, that makes sense. I wanted to, so we've talked about media, we've talked about AI and tech a lot. I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit to more of the entrepreneurship side. So, because I know you have experience in that world as well. So I wanted to start, Faris, by asking you, so I know you sit currently on the board of a lot of different companies, such as Benghati, Enhanced Fitness, Kidzonet, Alpha Capital, Takreem, Kafu, and a lot more. Now, sitting on the board, I think, you hear about it, but I don't think a lot of people really understand what that entails. What are the responsibilities that come with that? So I'd love to hear from you. I have a couple of questions on this. First of all, let's start with, could you elaborate as a board member, what are your roles and responsibilities? Because I think a lot of people still don't really understand what that means.
So look, you can end up on a board in multiple scenarios. I think the most classical scenario, that you're a shareholder in the company, you have a stake, you have equity in the company, and you sit on the board. Basically what it means is every 3 months or every month, depending, you sit with the guys running the company and they tell you what they're doing with your money. basically.
Okay.
I mean, that's to simplify it, right?
Okay.
That's a traditional sense of board.
Sure.
I've given you money, you're running with it. You know, let's agree that every month you're going to tell me what you're doing, what you've done with it, what you plan to do with it, and if you've done what you've said you're going to do.
Yeah.
That's the basic. Now,
and you have final say, right? So let's say I'm the CEO, I come to you and I'm like, this is my idea, this is what I want to do with your money. Do you have the right to be like, no, I don't think you should do that?
Of course.
You can.
Especially if you're an executive board member, like if you're a shareholder, then depending on your shares, there's a vote, and you can. Yeah, the whole point. A CEO comes, he presents a budget, and you approve it. Then he goes in, or she goes and spends. They present an initiative. You agree or don't agree. Depending on your shares, you can vote. You can win some votes. You can at some point, if you see that the CEO is not performing, the board is the one that replaces the CEO. If you have that executive power. Now, as the board gets more sophisticated, there are also different functions. Sometimes you're an advisory board, so you don't technically have equity in the company, but you are there for your subject matter expertise.
Okay.
Many boards now, a lot in the Middle East that are going from like a traditional, which is a family group where the board members are just family members, realizing like it'd be helpful to have someone with a technology background, someone maybe with a, depending on your industry, what's relevant. So that's another aspect of board where you're just providing a recommendation.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily, you might not have voting rights. You might just say, look, I think if you do it this way, I've seen it done that way, etc. Then you, in some cases, have actually a functional aspect in the board. So you could be head of the audit and risk committee. You could be head of the compensation committee. There are committees. So you have a functional role because ultimately, the way it works, right, there are different levels of management, and then it culminates with the CEO. The CEO is deciding, he could be deciding about the salaries, the bonuses, etc. But who decides on the CEO, right? So the board is the one that says, or the executive team. So there's a compensation committee that says, you're saying if you hit your milestone, you'll give yourself 100% bonus. Is that fair? Is that in line? Is that in line with the other compensation, with industry standard, etc.? If you're a large enough company or a publicly traded company, you'll get audited, and there are risks. Now, at this point, you are representing shareholders. So not just the owners of the board, all people who own stock or have money in that company. So as a head of audit and risk committee, your responsibility is to look at the audit that's usually performed by a third party, assess that there are no significant risks that needs to be flagged, and make sure that whatever is flagged is being addressed. And with that, even as a board member, which is probably on the other extreme of just advisory, you're liable and you have responsibility. And in some cases, if you make an innocent mistake, you might want to have board insurance. And my recommendation for aspiring board members or companies is to try to find synergy where somebody can help, ideally on all fronts.
Sure.
There are a lot of symbolic board memberships where people just put them, they don't engage. It's a waste. It's a waste of their time. It's a waste of the company's time. I've been approached by some board assignment that I couldn't see where I could add value, and there's no point to that too.
Sure.
So I think, especially if you're a startup, seek board members that believe in you enough, ideally to put money, because when you have money, it changes your level of interest significantly.
I'm sure.
But also who can be strategic advisors, who can help you. If you're looking for distribution, help you with distribution, manufacturing, have manufacturing background. I think those strategic board members can make or break a company. So
that's really interesting. I didn't know all the different types of board memberships that existed out there and the different functions. I didn't even know that board members were liable for certain things. So I thought they were the last decision makers.
They are. But let's say you're a board member of a publicly traded company, and you have actual responsibilities on the audit stuff, and you sign off on things, or as a board member, you sign off on some ridiculous compensation that was not worthy, then you're liable to, we go back to the basic example. What are you doing with my money? That's really what the board. So if you're a board member that represents shareholders, a whole group of shareholders, then you're liable to them because they've put you in that place to make sure that their money is being well used.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense. So the example you just gave about you don't, it sounds like if you feel you can't add value to a specific, someone who's asking you to be on the board, that's not something that's interesting to you because you're not going to benefit too much and they're not going to benefit either. So I guess the next question for me becomes, because you're on the board of such a diverse range of companies, so I think, number one, from my perspective, like if I'm analyzing that, I think you gain so much experience about so many different industries, which, I always believe the more you learn, the better, because you don't know when that learning is going to come in handy at some point down the line. It always does. That's my belief. So how has being involved in so many different boards changed your perspective, and how do you select which boards to join? Is there a part of it that's just pure interest, or is it that these are industries, for example, that are passionate about? Could you tell us how you think, like, how do you go about that selection?
Yeah, look, it's an art and a science. I think it's an industry that you find relevant and fascinating. It's a company within that industry that is doing exciting things. It's as simple as I like the board member. I like the management team, and I can add value. To me, it's been a privilege to be able, again, go back to the relevance, right? It's technology, and even the technology aspect and the media aspect of what my day-to-day is relevant, I would argue, to any sector and any company. And especially if you're a company that's transitioning from a traditional business and trying to kind of be more technology focused. So it becomes a question of who's more committed to this evolution, who's more interested and really kind of not doing it for show, and fulfills these industries. So every one of them has been fascinated. With Kafu is the largest fuel delivery company in the world now, and it's homegrown in the UAE, and the founder's the friend, and I think what they're doing is incredibly exciting wherever it ends. Bengati is one of the fastest developers. They are coming up with iconic buildings.
Yeah, they're massive.
Record time in delivery. They are vertically integrated. I've been impressed by the dynamics of how efficiently the family runs, and they're just good people. It's just everyone has been such an enriching experience to me that I think, I learn about an industry. I get exposure to how things work, and if I'm able to add value in my space, which I think, most places I've been, I feel we can always infuse.
Sure.
Is fantastic.
Yeah. So it sounds like it does come down to a combination of different factors when making those decisions. How much are these guys pushing the boundary? What's your interest? And also what seems very important, which I think in any business relationship, is the chemistry you have.
Absolutely. It's like getting into a relationship. Right?
Exactly.
Like you want to be able to discuss, argue, have good times, bad times. You go on a ride when you ride onto a board.
No, absolutely. No, I'm sure. So when it comes to entrepreneurship, you talked about, and I think I had this misconception. I think a lot of entrepreneurs in the early days have had this misconception that entrepreneurship is all about original thought. I'm the first one to do this, to think about this, and that's the only way to be successful. But as we've seen countless times, and I think Dubai and the UAE is a great example of replicating, getting ideas from abroad and localizing it very efficiently and very quickly. So, and I know you launched Glambox at the time and the way you described it was funny. It's like 4 guys launched the makeup brand and it worked. And you got that idea from somewhere else. Someone else that comes to mind, he was actually a previous guest of ours on the podcast, is Mr. Tawfiq Krediye, CEO of Brands for Less. So what's funny is when I saw the announcement recently of TJ Maxx buying him out, when we had him on the podcast and we were talking, he's like, Khalid, I got the idea for Brands for Less from TJ Maxx. I brought it here, it worked, and now 20 years later, he sold it back to the guys he got the idea from, which is, well, first of all, kudos, shout out Tawfiq if you're watching this, but it just shows you that entrepreneurship is not about, you know, the original thought. It's about, can you do this better? Can you localize it? Can you provide a better experience? So could you tell us about the Glambox experience? And I think this is the more important question, which I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with, is when do you know it's the right time to exit? Because I had someone on my show once, and he's like, the question he asked me is like, how greedy are you? And I'm like, oh, that's a good way to think about it.
So look, I always, when people say, you know, I have an idea or whatever, I think it's all in execution.
Yeah.
And if you want to be a bit more granular, execution and cash flow. You know, you got to manage your cash. And as a startup, most startups die because they run out of cash. Not that ideas are not great, or they just, you know, couldn't manage that process carefully. And execution eats, you know, strategy for breakfast. So how is, yes, how greedy you are. I mean, this, I think, this applies if something is just really flying and, you know, upset. That's a good scenario. I think that's simplifying a little bit, because a lot of time it's a constant roller coaster, and you have to, you know, be very committed, very, very committed to the view, but also open to be objective about how things are going.
Yeah.
And as you go in ups and downs, whenever you have a down, you have to figure, okay, can I come out of this? How can I come out of this? And then ultimately, where is that ceiling? Is there a ceiling, right?
Yeah.
Because there's many startups that will do well, but then you'll hit a capacity ceiling. You'll hit a supply ceiling. You'll hit sometimes a regulatory ceiling. And if you see that, then maybe the timing is before you hit that ceiling, because a lot of the valuation that you get is based on your future income, your future potential. And so if you're able to tell a story and see it of a very promising ceiling, then the focus becomes, how can I crystallize that story as much as possible, et cetera, and then move on. The problem that happened with startup, and I think it's starting to correct, which happens every few years, by the way, is people start building startups to exit.
Ah, interesting.
Yes, I hear it all the time. You know, it's like,
let's
again, let's simplify it. Let's simplify it. The father-in-law of one of my good friends, he was one of the co-founders, who's a very successful businessman. He has a restaurant chain and he's done very well for himself. I remember his son was marrying, my partner was marrying his daughter. And so we just met him casually, and he's trying, you know, to get how things were going.
Sure.
And so he's like, how much you guys make? And like, what do you mean? Like, a month. And like, oh, you know, this is cash flow and this. And he's like, but how much you make? Like a year. And, you know, and he's trying to get, at the time, now in retrospect, he's trying to figure out our cash flow.
Sure.
And he said, look, never build a business that you personally don't think is going to work. Like, you might, there's always another idiot that might buy it, but I think a lot of what I see with a lot of startups is this. It's just people building a startup, already thinking about selling it. If you can believe it can be a nice cash flow business, the most comfortable entrepreneurs, the ones who've done well, who do well in negotiation with VCs, that walk into a meeting and say, I'm very comfortable living off my startup. That is incredibly powerful position to be, because that's the ultimate belief in your business. Of course, you might need cash input, you might need growth, but I think the ethos got lost somewhere, where people go to raise cash so they can say, we have this valuation, so we exit. Like, okay, you go to raise cash because you have to have a story of the company making a profit before you exit. Because whoever's buying you is buying that potential. And because you personally don't believe it, and you're running the company towards that purpose, and there are, I can name you 10 startups in that phase right now, it's not a viable business. So I'm buying a small valuation, counting on someone buying a bigger valuation, and then, you know, the music stops.
Yeah.
And it's a musical chair, and the music stops, all these startups dry up and die.
Yeah.
And this happens in every decade cycle, etc. And the ones that have a real reason, have a why, are not a nice to have, but a must have, they survive.
Yeah.
So it's less about timing. It's more about what's your vision for this and where are you towards that vision.
Yeah.
If you have a vision that this could be a global startup and you're really onto some idea, I mean, look at our CEO. You know, there's multiple anecdotes of attempts to buy. I mean, the Paul Allen, the CEO of Microsoft, former CEO of Microsoft, said I threw billions at him. He wasn't even interested. And I think that's a telltale when you're onto something.
Yeah. I don't know if I was in his position, I probably would have taken the billion, honestly, that myself.
10 billion, I think, Microsoft. I think he was offered $1 billion way before. Yeah, look, everybody says that, but Mark is doing okay.
I think he's doing just fine. But I think the point you made is so refreshing, that because I think, like you said, over the years, even in the conversations I've had with people, entrepreneurs on my podcast who have exited businesses and so on, the exit is the secondary choice. Like, an exit is this thing that is possible, but I am building this, like you said, because I have a vision for it, and more importantly, my intent is for this to be the biggest, best, most successful thing it can be. Once and if I run into the problems that you mentioned, like those ceilings and need more cash flow, then that second option becomes something to maybe consider or think about. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. I think, look, I taught a class at AUD and at this postgraduate class, and before, whenever we were discussing any topic, I try to really break it down to if you own a shop, because I think that perspective gets lost when we use fancy language and all this business school stuff. Ultimately, it's when you're taking somebody's money, it's not your money. This is an investment in the business. And now people are, they're coming up with these fancy terms like kind of leverage equity, convertible debt. Still not your money. Actually, it's less your money if it's a debt. But ultimately, I'm giving you this money because you commit to me that we will both make more money. And if I am investing with you, I don't want to count on the possibility that you're going to find someone else who will think somehow they'll turn this around. It happens, but rare. And in the current crunch that we have now, even more rare. So people want to see that you're making money. And the closer you get them to that idea, so if you have a product, you have a higher valuation. That product started making some money, you have a higher valuation. You break even, you have a fantastic valuation. You show that you're able to scale beyond your borders, higher valuation. All of these are just signals. Signals. You can end up in a situation like the OpenAI that said, look, we don't know how we're going to make money. We don't know, but we're here. But,
that's rare.
When you look at it and you see what they're doing, the possibility is quite obvious. So the closer you get me to that possibility, the better. But if I'm an investor, I'm going to ask you some really tough questions. And I'm going to ask you some really negative questions. Not because I don't believe in the idea, but as a former mentor used to say, you told me everything that could go right, now tell me everything that could go wrong. Because once you go through everything that could go wrong, we could both learn and make the case more solid, or decide to walk away, because there's nothing worse than throwing good money after bad money.
Oh, I've never heard someone say that.
Absolutely, it's not my saying. It's a common, but it's absolutely it's a common issue that you get yourself in a hole, and because of pride or because of ego, you refuse to see the reality that it's not working, and you throw more good resources that could be utilized for something else.
For something else. No, absolutely. And I think the point you mentioned about coming earlier to what you said about there's a lot of great ideas, but it comes down to the execution. And you've mentioned that the region in particular here doesn't lack ideas, but our Achilles heel is our ability to execute. So my question is, when you said that, I was thinking, what's the struggle in the region on the execution side? What is it that we're lacking, or is it an infrastructure thing, or is it a mentality? Is it a cultural thing? What's that block that is preventing a lot of those, let's say out of 100 ideas, those 10 to actually come to fruition and be successful?
Look, there's many reasons. I think some of them are outside your control. You know, there could be more friendly regulations. I think there could be easier access to capital. We have some venture capitalism here, but I think we have just sophisticated banking more than venture capital. Like people are not taking huge leaps. But all that aside, because that's outside, you know, I think what I most commonly see is over-romanticized idea of entrepreneurship. You know, people think, you know, what they see on social media, and they think like, oh, this is going to be like me wheeling and dealing, and you know. When we launched Glambox, I remember I found that like the first weekend of official launch, we were all MBA, top schools. We were all packing boxes. We were all packing boxes, unloading truck worth of boxes, hand packing the boxes that were of the first batch of Glambox that went out. Nothing glamorous about it. And you have to find the joy in that.
Yeah.
And I think people have this romanticized idea, and the reality is that you will have at least multiple times where you don't know where payroll is going to come from. You will have moments where clients are unhappy, and there'll be many, many moments where the crash of the company is imminent. You have to be uncomfortable with that level of uncertainty. You have to be uncomfortable with adjusting your lifestyle down, most certainly, unless you're kind of independently wealthy. A ton of rejections. People who have business and people who don't have business giving you opinions will give you opinions. You have to be comfortable kind of being alone and foregoing social status. I've seen many entrepreneurs that do really well that come from a corporate world, that come from very prestigious positions. And that step down to people not taking their call anymore is something they have to come to grips with. So I see there's very little romantic side of it. A good entrepreneur, you could see the scars and you could see and that's what gives them the dimensions. So the willingness to do the grit, to do the work. Of course, you know, there are countries like Scandinavia has the highest number of unicorns per capita in the world because they also have a social net, you know, the government, if they get unemployed, etc. But also they have this culture of appreciating hard work. You know, they look at it as a privilege.
Yeah.
You know, I think that mentality is essential if you're trying to build something from scratch.
No, absolutely. And like you correctly said, you know, I'm only a year and a half into my journey, and it's been quite the reality check, I must say, going through this experience. Like you said, there's a lot of alone time, there's a lot of difficult things you thought would be so easy are actually, to get that thing that you thought was easy takes 10 million steps, you know, to get there, and just keep throwing spaghetti at the wall. What's going to stick? All right, okay, we'll keep that one, and you have to keep going. And like you said, I think the over-romanticization of entrepreneurship that I think has affected not just here, but like globally, people are not taking into consideration what it takes to actually, you know, build that business. And coming on to, you talked about you didn't pursue your passion, but you found it through the work that you were doing. And the quote that you said, that you mentioned was, people who say that are usually billionaires who made their money doing very unpassionate things. So I guess the question to you, Faris, is do you think, is finding your passion a luxury to those who have the time and resources to find it? Because I think a lot of times people maybe don't find their passion because of the restrictions of life that we all have.
Yeah, I think, look, it's a conceptual concept of finding your passion. I think the key, you look at the key to happiness, is finding the passion in what you do, not necessarily doing always what you're passionate about.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, again, depends on what your priorities are. But if you want to have a successful kind of traditional successful venture, there has to be an overlap between what you're good at, what the world needs, and then the timing of when you're doing this. Yeah. So I think a lot of people will sometimes are good at some things that they don't enjoy, but it's a skill, or they're good at things that the world doesn't need, and then, you know, or the timing of it doesn't work. So this trifecta is important. And when you find that common space in that Venn diagram, that's a winning formula. And
Yeah.
I think succeeding in something also drives you to be passionate about it. Yeah, I think if you're driving real impact in something, I think there is that motivation of momentum. The same way, if you're doing something you're passionate about and it's not successful, then eventually it will wear on you.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, creators, it's like, look, it's a hobby until someone pays you for it. And it's fine. It can be a hobby.
Of course.
But if you're intending to say, what do you do, as a traditional sense, how do you make a living? If you're not making a living doing it, then it's a hobby.
Yeah.
And embracing that idea is important. Self-awareness is important.
Absolutely.
So that's why I think, I say this comment not to discourage people from pursuing their passion, but if you have you're a fantastic singer and you're doing the right thing, and great. This is the spot. But if it's not what you're passionate about, or it's not working for you, then you have to be nimble.
No, absolutely. And I think that point you mentioned about the self-awareness, that's super, super important, to check yourself, to understand that, yes, this is what I love to do. My dream is for to make a living doing what I love. But like you said, after time, reality is going to wear on you. Numbers don't lie. Life doesn't lie. You can keep dreaming forever, but if it's just not working, then it's time to maybe take a step back and reevaluate things.
Or change your perspective on it. It could perfectly be a healthy hobby.
Yeah.
And I've had people who've had hobbies that have outgrown their business.
There you go.
Also, they thought it was silly that they're so good at something that they felt is trivial, but there's a community for it, and if it works, why not?
Exactly, and I think that touches on the timing thing. Like, if it's not working right now, doesn't mean it's never going to work, but maybe there's something you need to do something else in the meantime while this has its time for that intersection to come together. Faris, I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been an amazing conversation. I just have one last question for you. These are questions that we ask all our guests. Now, our message with this podcast is that success comes in many forms and that learning never stops. And I think, obviously, throughout all of our lives, all of our careers, everyone learns a lot of things. But I speak from myself. I had a game-changer learning that changed my life, which was, for me, taking accountability. That was the thing that really changed my life completely, and is the reason I'm sitting in front of you right here today. So if I asked you, out of all the things you've learned, if there was one learning that you'd want to pass on to the audience and to the rest of us, what would you say?
Look, along the lines of taking responsibility, self-awareness, which I refer to as perspective. I think if you have the ability to look at a situation from an objective point of view, not from your vantage point, objective point of view, it unlocks everything. Because when I look at things from my vantage point, I'm only looking at how you make me feel, my potentially skewed perception of the situation, and heavily driven by emotions that could be temporary. When you step out of that, I'm able to see your perspective. I can still see my perspective, but I can also see how people are perceiving my perspective. And that gives me a much more balanced approach to things that resolves miscommunication, misunderstandings, and increases your self-awareness in a progressive way. So next time, I'll know that when I sit like this, or I say that, or I react a certain way, it has the following ramifications. It takes years and a lot of self-discipline and it's always a constant learning. But for me, this is absolutely, I think, the source to wisdom. Yeah.
That really resonates with me, Faris. I think that's something I've really been myself personally trying to train myself to do. It's not, as you said, it's not easy because we all have our own biases, our own skewed perceptions of the world, our opinions and so on. But like you, I 100% agree with what you said, that once you start to be able to see things from that third person perspective, you really get a more holistic view on a situation, a conversation, a relationship. And like you correctly said, it never stops. This is always an evolving process. The blind spots you have now, even when you fix those, down the line, you're going to have some new ones. So you got to just keep working at it. Faris, I wanted to say thank you so much for your time today and for coming on the show. I personally have really learned so much from you. I think you have a very nuanced viewpoint on entrepreneurship, and especially with tech and AI and your role in this field. And you guys are the ones that are at the forefront of this. You guys are the big boys, so you guys got to tell us where we're going so we can follow you. And thank you for giving us your honest opinions when it comes to entrepreneurship and so on, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs out there need to hear the kind of things that you said. And I think anyone listening to this conversation can take so much away from it. So I wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you guys, to everyone listening, and we will see you next time.